The silence of Berlin, the black king, is trapped on g8. The white bishop, firm on the long diagonal from b2 to g7, waits for nothing but the final breath. The white queen watches over the 7th rank from h7. The knight, planted on f6, cuts off every escape route. The clock reads 2 minutes and 49 seconds. Nobody breathes. Two men stare at each other in silence. And all that remains is understanding how they arrived at this destiny. Hours before this moment, the International Chess Tournament of Berlin. On one side of the board sits Adrian Miller, American, 23 years old, a disciple of Fischer's legendary games. On the other side sits Sergei Volkov, Russian, a veteran, European champion, with eyes of steel and a gaze that has studied 10,000 positions. The arbiter starts the clock. Adrian touches his king's pawn and advances it 2 squares. e4, classic, direct, straightforward, the opening of someone who does not fear combat. It is a declaration of intent written in the language that only chess players truly understand. Sergei observes for a moment, then he responds by pushing his pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense. Not a word passes between them, only war remains. Adrian's knight moves to f3. Sergei's pawn descends to d6, solid and prepared, creating space for his bishop to breathe. Adrian pushes his pawn from d2 to d4. The tension at the center of the board intensifies. Sergei captures with his c5 pawn. Adrian's knight recaptures on d4. The center opens like a wound. The battle has truly begun. The black bishop emerges to e7, securing the long diagonal. Sergei castles kingside, tucking his king into safety. Adrian castles as well, mirroring his opponent's caution. Everything seems balanced on a knife's edge, equal and measured, as if both players are taking each other's measure like two boxers circling in a ring. But then something shifts. Adrian advances his king's rook pawn to h4. Volkov lifts his gaze from the board for the first time, and his eyes narrow slightly. h4 is not a move of defense. h4 is not a move of patience. h4 means attack. h4 means courage burning beneath the surface. h4 means, I came here to defeat you, not to draw with you. I came here to teach you something about the game you thought you owned. Sergei's knight moves to c6, striking at the center and asserting pressure. Adrian does not retreat. Instead, he pushes his pawn to g4, a gambit, psychology made visible, calculated madness dressed in the clothes of strategy. It is a move that says, I will sacrifice material if it means your king will never rest safely again. Volkov responds with his bishop to e6, blocking the diagonal and suggesting solidity and control. But Adrian, without hesitation, captures that bishop with his own, a pure sacrifice. The black pawn recaptures immediately. Sergei's king structure is now compromised, fractured like ice beginning to split in spring. Minutes become hours. Pieces fall like autumn leaves. The silence in the tournament hall grows thicker, heavier, more suffocating. Spectators stop speaking. The noise of the city beyond the walls seems to fade into irrelevance. There's only the board and the two minds locked in combat above it. 20 moves pass, then 30. The middle game has transformed completely. The position is no longer about openings or theoretical knowledge. It has become something more primal, a battle of understanding, intuition, and the ability to see 3 moves ahead while your opponent sees only 2. Adrian sacrifices again his rook for a bishop and 2 pawns. Sergei's position looks desperate now, but the Russian veteran, this man who has played against world champions and held his own, continues to calculate. There are no flags or banners waving. There is no crowd roaring. There is only the faint sound of pieces being moved and the urgent ticking of the clock. At move 37, the final moment arrives like a storm breaking. Adrian's knight leaps forward to f6. Check. The black king has nowhere to go but h8. The white queen slides smoothly to h7. The king is encircled now, trapped in the corner of the board like a prisoner in a cell with no doors. The white bishop, positioned way back on b2, gazes down the long diagonal and controls the very last square of escape. There is no tower to block. There is no pawn to shield. There is no salvation to be found anywhere on this battlefield of 64 squares. Sergei Volkov understands the position completely. He has played enough chess in his life to know when the game is over, when mathematics and logic have spoken their final verdict. He looks at the board with the eyes of a master who has seen 1,000 positions like this one, and 1,000 positions even worse. Then he looks at the young American across the table. He sees something in Adrian's face, not arrogance, but clarity. The clarity of a player who knows he has played perfectly. who has found the truth in the position through sheer calculation and courage. Sergei could knock over his king right here. He could lay it down and accept the inevitable, but he does not do this immediately. Instead, he picks up his king with his own fingers. He holds it for a moment, feeling its weight, remembering all the games it has survived, all the battles it has witnessed. He closes his eyes for a brief second, not in despair but in acknowledgement. Then, without the formality of resignation, he simply extends the piece toward Adrian, placing it gently in the hands of his opponent, not as a gesture of defeat, not as an act of submission, but as an act of respect. It is the gesture of one warrior acknowledging another, of one master of the game recognizing the superior play of his opponent on this particular day. In this particular moment, in this particular silence, Adrian accepts the king without ceremony, without gloating, without any expression at all. He simply nods, and that nod contains everything: the struggle, the sacrifice, the calculation, and the understanding of what has just occurred. Later, when the game is recorded in the tournament book, the final move is noted in simple terms. Knight to f6, king to h8, mate is inevitable in 2 moves, but for those who witnessed this game, for those who sat in the audience and felt the tension build like electricity in the air, it was not merely chess. It was not simply a competition between 2 minds trying to prove which one was superior. It was honor. Pure, absolute, undeniable honor. The kind of honor that transcends the game itself and becomes something greater, a moment when 2 human beings meet at the highest level of their art and acknowledge each other not with words but with the universal language of respect. Adrian Miller walked away from the Berlin tournament that year as the champion, but the tournament director, when asked years later to name the most beautiful game ever played on that stage, did not choose Adrian's final victory. Instead, she spoke about Game 7, Round 4, Miller versus Volkov, and she described it not as a game but as a conversation between 2 souls who understood each other perfectly through the only language that mattered, the language of chess, and beneath it, the language of complete and total respect. Sergei Volkov never returned to Berlin after that year. He retired from competitive play 5 years later, having played over 500 games in his career. But in his home in Moscow, he keeps a framed photograph of that position, the position right before his resignation. Beneath it is a plaque that reads, "The Silence of Berlin," where I learned that true greatness is not in victory, but in recognizing it in another. Adrian Miller went on to become a grandmaster of the highest order, a player whose name is spoken in the same breath as the legends of the game. He has won tournaments on every continent and has played against the greatest minds of his generation. But in every interview, in every biography, when asked to name the game that changed his life, he always answers the same way: my game against Sergei Volkov in Berlin. Because he taught me that chess is not about winning, it is about understanding. And when understanding is complete, victory becomes almost irrelevant. Years passed, decades even, the world changed. Technologies evolved. Chess became digital, accessible, democratized in ways that could never have been imagined in those quieter times. But the essence of the game remained unchanged. Adrian and Sergei never played each other again. They corresponded occasionally through letters, then emails, and later through the universal networks that connected all people regardless of geography or nationality. They would discuss openings they had seen, positions they had analyzed, students they were teaching, but they never arranged a rematch. Both understood that what they had shared in Berlin existed in a unique moment, in a unique context, and that trying to recreate it would only diminish it. One day, Sergei wrote to Adrian, "You know, that game in Berlin was the only loss that never felt like a loss. It felt like a graduation. You graduated from being simply a talented young player to being a true master of our art, and I had the privilege of being there when it happened." Adrian replied, "But you were the one who taught me the most valuable lesson. You showed me that strength is not in refusing to lose. Strength is in recognizing excellence and bowing to it with dignity. That is a lesson no textbook could have taught me." The Silence of Berlin became legendary. Chess players studied that game in academies and clubs around the world. Coaches used it to teach their students not just about strategy and tactics, but about the philosophy of chess, about what it means to truly master something. The final moves were analyzed endlessly. Variations were explored. Computer engines were run to verify the accuracy of every single move. And they found what everyone expected, that Adrian's play was nearly perfect, that his sacrifice had been calculated with precision, that there had been no wild gamble, but instead a careful and methodical climb toward inevitable victory. But what the computers could never explain, what no analysis engine could quantify, was the moment when Sergei extended his king toward Adrian. That moment existed beyond calculation. It existed in the realm of human understanding, of recognition between two people who had devoted their entire lives to the pursuit of excellence. Within the boundaries of a 64-square board, if you were to travel to Berlin today, if you were to visit the exact tournament hall where this game was played, the modern structure has been renovated and rebuilt many times over. The chessboards where that epic struggle occurred have long since been stored away or discarded. The clock that marked the time has probably been melted down or passed through 1,000 hands. But if you speak to the old chess masters in Berlin, if you ask them about the most important game ever played in their city, they will tell you about the silence. They will describe the young American and the Russian veteran. They will tell you how the entire hall fell silent, not the silence of boredom, but the silence of reverence, the silence of witnesses observing something that transcends the ordinary. And they will tell you that in chess, just as in life, the greatest victories are not always measured in points or ratings or tournament standings. Sometimes, the greatest victory is simply recognizing excellence in another human being and honoring it, completely and without reservation. That is what Sergei Volkov did when he extended his king toward Adrian Miller on that autumn day in Berlin. He acknowledged that he had been defeated not through luck or chance, but through superior play and superior understanding. And in that acknowledgement was a kind of victory that no computer engine will ever be able to measure or calculate. The clock eventually ran out, as clocks always do. The tournament ended. Other games were played. Other champions emerged. The world moved forward into whatever future awaited. But in the hearts of those who witnessed it, the silence of Berlin remained eternal, a moment when two human beings played the game they loved at its absolute highest level and created something that transcended the game itself and became a meditation on honor, respect, excellence, and the profound human capacity to recognize greatness in another.